Hey, good morning, everyone. I am Joe Rizzo with the Loudon Museum, and this is another edition of our Pour Over History series. And for this week, we have John Heckman, aka the Tattooed Historian, who I asked to join us for this episode to get some ideas about how we can think of this current time that we're in and how we can document it as well and save some of our experiences and our thoughts for the future. So, John, thanks so much for joining us here. Hope you're doing well. I know you're getting ready to move to Canada pretty soon. Hopefully this hasn't disrupted that too much for you.
No, it hasn't. Thank you, Jeff, for having me on. I'm really excited about the new venture because I'll be earning my PhD finally, and I'm waiting for the student visa to come through, and then I can start, moving some things north. I already have a place picked out, so I'm ready to go.
Awesome. And I will say as well, I usually drink King Street coffee from Leesburg when I've been doing these, but because I know you're a Tim Hortons fan, I made some Tim Hortons coffee for this
Oh
morning.
man, that makes two of us.
Every time I see a post about thing at Tim Hortons, every time I'm back in Buffalo, Tim Hortons is a daily trip for me when I go up there.
Oh yeah, it can't be beat. I'm usually a Tim Hortons or a Death Wish coffee guy. So yeah, one of the two.
Yeah, so luckily Tim Hortons, and we've got Wegmans down here, so I can buy Tim Hortons from Wegmans, and it makes it a lot easier than trying to get it shipped down to me like I used to when I was in South Carolina.
Yeah, I drive 40 minutes to get Death Wish and Tim Hortons at Wegmans, but it's a 40-minute drive. But I gladly do it because it wakes me up every morning. So
Yeah, well now you'll have probably on every street corner. If I remember Canada well, Tim Hortons is basically their Starbucks.
Yeah, one is probably about a minute and a half drive from where I'm staying. So I'm not far. I can go around the corner, get coffee and a bagel every morning, and go to class.
Perfect. So John, I had really two main reasons I wanted to have you on. One, to just get your sense of how you're observing museums handling this current crisis, especially moving digitally. And then maybe we can talk about some tips for our regular viewers about how they can record these times and then also send them to us for a digital exhibit we're trying to make. But I do want to get your thoughts and reflections on how museums are handling this period. I mean, you've been doing digital history well before everyone's basically switched over to this kind of platform because the museums and sites are closed. But you with the Tattooed Historian page have been doing this for a while now. So I was wondering how you see this increase in museum online programming changing kind of how museums interact with their audience in the long term.
It's been a really interesting thing to watch because I've seen a lot of museums and archives who innocently took their position for granted. It's the brick and mortar thing, and I'm starting to see a lot more digital come out because it's the only way we can reach a new audience now en masse. And I'm loving how you see the creativity start to pop with a lot of these museums and archives. How are they getting their message out, and what are they doing to authentically showcase their mission? And it's just been really cool to see it. And I've seen a lot of great museums and really take off with it. I've seen some small museums who have really showcased great artifacts that they have. They've talked about, they've done live stream tours of the building. They've done all kinds of things. I'm just loving to watch the creativity come alive. And you're right, I've been doing the Tattooed Historian brand for several years now. And I built the brand simply to showcase history in all its forms and bring people on who knew a lot more than I ever did, probably than I ever will, or showcase museums and artifacts and exhibits. So now that we have the issue of social distancing, I can't be there physically, but I'm watching people who can be there because they work there showcase these items. And it's really cool to see the overlap of how they are doing it compared to maybe how I did it 2 years ago or how someone else did it a few years ago. Because I wasn't the only one who was doing it, but I was one of the few who was doing it full time as far as a social media brand. And it's really awesome to see the authenticity come out and the creativity come out at this time because that's what's necessary.
Yeah, do you think this is going to be a continuing trend where even once we can open up, hopefully not too far from now, but keeping with an online presence like we've seen?
I sure hope so because it reaches a new audience. It allows people to reach an audience who may not be able to step through the door of where they're at. I know I haven't been to many of the states in the union, So I get to see archives and museums that I never would have seen before, exhibits I never would have seen before. And I'm just thinking of the fact that it's free publicity. And you can put the stuff up on Facebook. You can put it up on Facebook Live, on Instagram, on Twitter, YouTube, etc., and put all this stuff up and build a new kind of brand awareness that you never would have been able to do, or you didn't think about doing a year ago. And the game has changed now to where the field is really leveled now, because I'm starting to see when I'm doing a live stream, maybe 3 or 4 other historical entities are doing live streams at the same time. And I personally feel bad about being on at the same time as someone else because they're trying to get the views and such. But we're in a bubble right now where a lot of people are taking advantage of the social media sites and building brand awareness, just like I had done for 3 or 4 years, just with a master's degree and I have no archival holdings. I have no exhibits. So when I see people who have exhibits and archival holdings, it's like every piece of that to me is at least 20 posts. And some people look at me funny for the last year, but now they're like, wow, okay, we can actually make this happen and increase awareness.
Yeah, and have you gotten a sense really how the audience has reacted to this? I mean, are you seeing a new audience being reached? Are you seeing really acceptance and really enjoying this increased access to different organizations and the amount that's coming out from your followers and other ones out there?
Yeah, my following typically was about 65 to 70% under the age of 40. So I had a very young following in the history field for the longest time, but now because it's basically the only format in town to get your historical, I guess the food that you want to ingest, you're starting to see an older demographic start to come on board, because now we're all looking at the same place to try to find what we need. So the demographic shift has occurred, but that also means more people are online looking for this stuff. So I'm really interested to see where this leads to in the future. Facebook has traditionally had a demographic which has become older. When you talk to someone who is a 20-year-old in college, they say, that's what my parents are on. I don't want to be on that, which is why now I'm on, I believe, 8 platforms. So I'm always going different directions with it. But you're starting to see other public history sites doing the same thing. And maybe they had a Facebook before this began, but now they have an Instagram and a Twitter now. And you're starting to see that overlap begin, of where they're catching new demographics. And I think the people will stay there even after this is all over.
Yeah, I guess you can chalk me up to one of the older crowd. I didn't even know there were 8 platforms you could be on. So I guess I've got to figure out some more. I mean, we've done what we can through a few different platforms, but I mean, there's always new ones that are popping up as well. Right. And I think that's kind of the key, is rather than being resistant, like maybe I think sometimes museums have been, see this as a real opportunity that you can get followers, even if they can't come to your museum or historic site. They can be much more involved on a regular basis now, which is something I've really enjoyed about kind of moving things virtually, is every week we've got multiple things out that people can kind of be a part of a true virtual community.
Right. Yeah. And each platform has a different demographic. So your messaging is slightly different for each platform. And that's where you get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, when you're doing that. Now, I'm not a numbers guy. I don't look and I don't fret if I have 100 followers or 5,000 followers. I don't pay attention to that. I pay attention to the content creation, as far as, am I bringing value to the people who are on there, and am I interacting with my audience? And I'm starting to see a lot more public history entities doing just that. They're not worried about reaching 10,000 people. They're worried about, are we hitting 2,000 people with a good message? Yeah. And that's where you really see a great thing coming to life with the creativity end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the other reason I wanted to have you on was to get your thoughts on this kind of project that we've started at the museum. As we've got a new blog up that we started once we had to shut the museum down for a bit. And one of the things we want to do is have people think about this with kind of history and preservation in mind. And we want to be able to have a virtual exhibit up, maybe get some blogs up, and maybe even at the museum exhibit about how people remember this moment in their lives, their thoughts, their experiences, their concerns. So I was wondering if you could maybe help some of our viewers out who are maybe struggling to know how to go about doing this. What are some effective ways that people can document their experiences?
I've seen varying ways of doing that, but each one of us is a biography, and we have to be able to tell our own story. And I look at it from a historian standpoint, where I look back at records from previous pandemics or previous historical events and think, what would I like to know about that period that maybe isn't in this journal or in this diary? So I'm thinking forward. I'm thinking of what will two generations from now, what will they want to know about what we just went through? And at the same time, understanding that I have to tell my story as well. But maybe think about plugging in a few things that I know that are going to want to understand about it. And I see a lot of people utilizing new media in that regard. I'm seeing a lot of people embracing doing the old school journals. I'm seeing a lot of people doing vlogs or video blogs, blogging, obviously social media outlets. A lot of people are documenting their journey on social media and saving them onto hard drives, which is an awesome thing, because then in 10 years, they can be like, here's my hard drive from this decade of my life, and this is what it is. So instead of having photo albums or whatever we used to have, it's just like, here's a terabyte of what we just went through. And I really think that's something that we need to embrace, because we need to showcase who we are as people individually to understand the collective. And I really think that understanding what each person went through at this time is very, very important to understanding the larger narrative. And I look back on other historical periods with that mindset of we often look from the top down. It's also time to look from the bottom up and think about what we're going to say in 30 years. I mean, I would love to see, I'm seeing so many vlogs from nurses and doctors now, and that's going to be used with future medical students and such. So we have to think about it in our own path as well. How can we influence future generations to see how we perceive this era?
Yeah, that's a good point about diaries and journals. It's probably a bit maybe uncomfortable for people to start doing that process if they've never done that before. And maybe the answer to it is viewed as more as a social media kind of thing. But I think with diaries and journals, you can really then get really reflective in your own past, because it is really just you putting down your thoughts. Any tips for maybe the kinds of questions people should ask themselves when they're going about doing this, and maybe trying to become more comfortable with putting their emotions onto paper and then willing to send to the museum?
One of the biggest things that I had to overcome, and that I know a lot of people have to overcome before they even post on social media, but also blogging and also writing in a journal, is you have to get over that level of insecurity of wondering how you're going to be judged. Don't worry about how someone is going to perceive your work. Just put your work down and start to mold it. Be consistent. Be comfortable with who you are and be comfortable with the message. I find that a lot of museums and other people who I've worked with, I've mainly worked with museums and public historians to try to give them brand awareness and such. They don't want to post, or they don't want to write because they're afraid of what someone's going to say. But yet it's their story. So we have to get over this idea that we're going to be judged at every minute based on what we put down on paper or what we put down in a blog. Each one of us has a voice. We have to be able to give that voice to the masses in one way or another. And you have to think of it too. If you're writing a journal, only a select few are probably going to see that journal. Because I know that, some people kept diaries and we didn't find it till 50 years later in a box somewhere in the attic. So it's also therapeutic for a lot of people just to get it down on paper and let their emotions out on paper, or if you choose on a blog. So being consistent is one of the main things. Don't worry about judgment. Just tell your truth and let people know how you feel. That's one of the great things in life, is you can be authentic. And I've talked to a great man one time, and he told me I was still worrying about judgment. on my work. And he told me, he goes, John, you wake up in the morning and you think of yourself as this large, juicy, crisp apple. But some people just like bananas more. And that changed my life. I was like, whoa, that's just the weirdest thing but to think about, but that changed my life. And I was like, huh, that's true. You know, I can't please everybody, but this is my truth, and this is who I am, and this is who I'll authentically be. And I think the brand that I built showcases at times that some people were like, you're going to ruin history, or you're going to do this or whatever, but still I'm doing my truth, and I'm being secure with who I am. And I think if people would be consistent and consistently write or consistently make vlogs or videos about their experiences, because they want their truth to be known to future generations, I think if you thought of it that way, that you would have more incentive to do just that.
Yeah, and thinking back as well, some of the most insightful diaries are just of regular people. And one thing I definitely want our audience to know, if you're thinking at home, my experiences probably aren't worth, putting in an exhibit or anything like that. It's really not the case. While getting people who are on the front lines, of course, their experiences are fantastic to know, but everybody's experiences are going to be different. And everyone's are really just as important, as everyone is viewing this in a unique way. And even if you're walking down the street and it's an empty street, I would love to get more photos, sent in to us for our virtual collection on this, for things like that too. Or an ordinary street. I mean, it's not ordinary in the sense that that's usually a street that's got traffic going on it all the time, and things like that, or an empty area or parking lot. How do you feel about seeing that? Is this bringing you anxiety? Is this giving you more of a reflection time period? But I just really want people to know that, their opinion and their views and their emotions really matter during this time, and definitely things that we want to collect for the blog that we started and for our virtual collection. But really, I think you made a good point, like for just history as a field. I mean, that's really what defines the entire field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, each individual experience is a history. And when you said about the empty streets and the empty parking lots, all I could think of was I see so many people documenting their town's history now, and they're showcasing things like that from the 1905 or something like that, and how different the streets were. And then they're making it into a virtual reality experience or augmented reality. And so when you said that, my mind immediately, because I trained myself this way, is thinking, how can we utilize this as a VR experience or an AR experience, or just to have it as a thing showcasing what social distancing actually did to the environment around us, our physical environment. And that's just so important. And we take that for granted, right? We drive down the street to go to the store and it's deserted and we're kind of depressed, or because of that situation, or our favorite shop is closed or whatever. But now that may be the time for us to take the initiative and document that and create that awareness for the future to be remembered, and because we're taking so much for granted for so long. And then when it's closed or it's gone, we're like, wow, remember when, we could actually go to a concert together. Remember when we had baseball. And now it's like, wow, it'd be really an interesting thought to think about, all this stuff being deserted. And once this is over, we can utilize those photographs as a way to say, we don't want this to happen again in that way. We want to be able to fight back.
Yeah, that's a great point, that everyone is going to reflect back on this for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. And, a decade from now plus, people are going to be telling stories about the spring and hopefully not summer and fall, where we were basically inside for most of the time. Hopefully it doesn't stretch out too long, but definitely is a period that will be seared in our psyche for a while. So I think any way we can try to remember that and document those feelings is definitely going to be worthwhile for the future, for trying to keep that alive.
Oh, yeah.
This has been great. Any other last final thoughts or things you want our viewers to think about while they start sending in some of these entries?
Well, first, I want to thank you, Joe, for having me on and doing this, because this is a very important thing to do. And I really want to stress to people that I want you all to, if you would, to write down your experiences or video your experiences, make it for future generations, because there's going to be historians who aren't born yet who are going to want to know your story. And it's very important that you tell it truthfully, honestly, and not worry about that judgment. Make it as authentic as possible. Because as I say, we have future generations who are going to come along and be like, what was it like to live through this time? Because we're all going to be going back to normalcy, hopefully very, very soon, as soon as possible. And we're going to reflect on this, and we're going to tell future generations, you weren't there, but this is what we went through. And so I'm reaching out to you to say, please document your journey no matter what. Even after this is over, please document your journey, because you are a biography, and we're all going to be history. So we might as well put our little mark on history ourselves.
Yeah, great point. So again, John, thanks again for joining us for this Pour Over History episode. And everyone, I definitely urge you to follow the Tattooed Historian on Facebook, on Instagram, and apparently 6 other platforms I'm unaware of.
We'll list them out.
Great. So again, thanks again, John, and stay safe.
Thank you, Joe. Take care of yourself.